pieces to this puzzle. You might have heard of this guy. So on the 28th of August 1963, this black man stood up to the workers' rights rally, 250,000 people in front of the Lincoln Memorial, looking at the Washington Memorial, and he started reeling off his workers' rights speech. The black lady behind him said, "Tell him about the dream." And so he carried on because he's a good black boy. And a bit later she said again, and this time he answered and he listened, and Martin Luther King put his speech to one side and gave one of those great oratories that we all now know. Imagine if MLK had have said, "I have a plan." That speech would have gone down in the footnotes of history. It would have been lost. What does that teach us as directors? That people get behind causes, not things. A purpose is a cause. Why does your company exist? Last Saturday, I was in Palmerston North in New Zealand doing a report back for a third sector organisation, church-based organisation, having done this big structural review, and the recommendations are up on the screen, and the first one was sort out your purpose, or words to that effect. And I said to them, look, I've interviewed the 13 members of your main board, and I've talked in focus groups with 85 other people, and as I've gone through these 13 people, every single one of you have told me what the purpose of the organisation is. That's absolutely fantastic. Difficulty I've got is that I've got 13 different answers. Not good. Most directors have got a view as to why the company exists. Barton and Wiseman, and it's written up in Harvard Business Review about 15 months ago, Barton and Wiseman reported that 16% of corporate directors that they worked with through this research process could explain the purpose of the company and talk about lucidly the corporate sector, the industry, if you will, that this company worked in. And here we are asking company directors to make informed decisions in the boardroom when they don't understand the purpose of the company and have got no idea or limited idea around the context, that contextual basis within which the company operates. Go figure. So the first thing we need to get right is purpose. The second is values, what the company believes in. And the third goes with it, the behaviour standards, because they underpin our values, they go together. And then the fourth thing is strategy. Now, like governance, this term is uttered a lot. And it seems today that almost every 5 minutes somebody says, "Oh, that was a strategic choice." And it was like they pulled the word off a dictionary somewhere. It's entered our lexicon. It's like corporate governance, you know. We now have IT governance and HR governance and clinical governance. My wife is a GP and she knows about clinical governance. She's got no idea what it is. And it's not because of any reason. She says, "Peter, how does clinical governance go with corporate governance? And how does that go with governance as in government?" Campbell will answer that later. Gotcha. I haven't mentioned that team yet. That strategy, and sorry, this is a bit of a Greek lesson here, it won't take very long. Strategy comes from the word strategos, from which also we get the word general, military, the art of command. So that gives us a clue that strategy, appropriately, is something that happens at the top end of organisations. And if we put any of you with military backgrounds, we know that it's something that happens before we engage, not while we're engaging. That's called tactics. And so the implication here is that it is at the top of companies, and the questions are, where are we now? Where are we trying to get to? How do we get there? And crucially, from a measurement point of view, how do we know? And if we can get those four things sorted out and written down, then we've got the basis for a successful board and a successful board meeting. Helpfully, That's been put together by some very skilled academics called Campbell and Young about a quarter of a century ago in the context of mission achievement. It's really good. About the same time, an academic sitting in the UK called Bob Tricker, fantastic elderly man, wonderful guy, in 1984 said, strategic management, so that's develop strategy, decide, implement it, monitor that it's happening, that cycle. Tricker said that is appropriately located at the nexus between board and management. So if you get that diamond in Tricker's thing, you might be onto a winner, only that nobody picked it up. And so this non-academic ex-farm boy came along and said, why not? We need to have a look at this. This might be significant. So I did. And through that, I shadowed two reasonably large high-growth companies, one privately held, one public unlisted. Have you got public unlisted companies here? Yeah, so you know the category I'm talking about. And I sat in their boardroom, silent, but with the tape recorder running, making notes for 12 months. And interviewed their chairman and their chief executive and one or two others, and got all of their board packs, all of their minutes, everything for 3 years, and got actually more than a decade worth of other public data. So I had a fair bit of stuff and had to try and work out what was going on. And what I discovered, and sorry, this is a bit of an academic picture. This is inside my PhD. I'm going to say once it passes, but if it passes, hopefully. We're going to convert this into something that's more commercially oriented. This model emerged. And basically what it says is that rather than having an either or, so with strategy, the board should be involved or management should be involved, this one says, no, we wade into the middle, that intimacy of the relationship that Tricker talked about 25, 30 years ago now does actually make sense. So one of the companies that I worked with did exactly that. The strategy away days was not just strategic thinking. It wasn't just the management sitting there saying, here's our presentation, debate it with us. It was externally facilitated, and everybody in the room was a peer, and they worked through the issues, they identified the strategic options, and then over time through that day and through the days that followed, they gradually narrowed it down to some preferences. Sure, management went away and did some more analysis and then they came back. But management and the board were true peers. Quite radical. Nothing to do with the division of labour around separation. If anything, it was proximity. So it's actually quite counterfactual. And as I've shared this with directors of large companies, I've got the real body language like this. Because the impact of this is you can't just turn up at a board meeting and ask questions and throw stones. This one, the impact of this is when you turn up at the board meeting, you've got a reasonable understanding of the business of the business. Because if you're going to contribute and add value, you need to know what's going on in the sector, you need to know what's going on in the company, you need to have informed yourself. So company directors, I now work on the basis, when I'm working with a board, of 1 week per company that you're involved in. So you've got about a day for the board, day to read your papers, and then 3 days to understand the business of the business, do your committee work and others. And that model applies whether it's a family business, an unlisted business, a PLC, whether it's 20 million turnover or 2 billion turnover. That's where I've got to with this. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and just because you do this model doesn't guarantee that water's going to come out. Sorry. What it guarantees is the likelihood of effective contributions goes north. And so there's 5 underlying things there, and I'm sorry the focus is not fantastic, but just in general terms, so the board does those things together with management. Strategic competence, absolutely crucial. The board individual directors need to know what's going on strategically, and they need to be able to engage. Active engagement. Not just turning up and cracking open your board papers for the first time when you walk in. Asking questions that are not already answered in your board pack, so you've done your homework. A sense of purpose, so we're agreed on where the boat is going, and we're locked into that, and our questions are in that context. Teamwork. So everything from working together, empathy, listening, cognition, being able to sort stuff out, but perhaps more than that, that notion of collective efficacy, that by working together we can actually make informed decisions. And then lastly, constructive control. And this is the notion of a coach versus a policeman. So as a board, we've got to keep the chief executive honest, but we do it like this to steer and guide and pilot, because that's what governance actually means, rather than getting out our baseball bat and whacking them, which is what governance has become. So the call here is to get back to the future, if you will. Just lastly, a few practical considerations. Number one, how much time should the board spend on what? Surveys suggest 25% of the time's on strategy, the rest is on compliance and monitoring. The suggestion through this research and through my experience as I work with boards around the place, family boards, other boards, global perspective, is if we can get the board up to 50% of its time in the meeting, looking at forward-facing stuff, we've actually got a much better chance of success than if we're spending 80% of our time looking through the rearview mirror at what's already gone and we can't undo. Driving your car, you're looking in the rearview mirror, you're glancing at what? See if another car's coming at you? Yep, that's fine. But stuff there is rapidly going away as you drive forward. So logic says, why are we spending our time on that? And yet lots of boards do. Interesting analogy. But I need to recognise that there is no one-size-fits-all on this. So if you've got an industry for which compliance is a serious and appropriate high priority, so forestry, mining, those more dangerous industries, some manufacturing categories, you need to spend your time making sure the compliance is under control. The call here is do it efficiently and effectively through reporting so that you can still look forward. But you'll probably end up more time in that category than a business that's really focused and doesn't have those requirements quite so much. There's some key questions around efficiency and effectiveness, and the bottom of those questions is the one that often gets overlooked. We talk about, are we getting the results? But results aren't benefits. Results are simply the numbers, the categories, the market share. The benefits are, we said that we were going to make this contribution to society, that our performance was going to be this, that our purpose for existence, our raison d'etre, was over here. Have we got over there? And the benefits that are expected to accrue from getting over there, are they actually accruing or not? And if the answer is or not, we need to find out why not. And if the answer's don't know, then the response is go and find out why. And just to bring us inside the boardroom, and a very, very practical comment, how do you keep this thing called strategy on the agenda? How do you keep the board facing forward? How do you keep that board as a value-creating engine, if you will? Suggestion here is to absolutely tip the agenda on its head. Still have all the same items, but do the reporting stuff, like the chief executive's report and the finance report, do it last when the directors aren't so fresh. Where you really want the directors to deliver value, do that stuff early when they're fresh. So yep, start off, and let's be really, really practical about this, really pragmatic. Minutes, last. Apologies, do that early, because you have to do that, right? You have to know who's there. So good stuff. And then go straight into your strategic issues. Maybe you've got some big capital projects that you need the board to wrestle with. Tick off first. Maybe you're dealing The comment here on that last one is have a look at each element of your strategy at each meeting. Let's say you've got 8 meetings a year and 4 strategic priorities. Why not do a deep dive every second month? And why not have a customer in the room talking to you about what they're trying to do in their sector? Not what our relationship with the customer is, but what they're trying to do in their sector. Tell us what's emerging. And I bet you'll find out more about that sector in that 10 minutes or quarter of an hour relationship with a customer than your chief executive will tell you through their filter or the head of sales. Fascinating information comes out of that. And the board will ask questions and that customer will answer those questions with no filter. That's got to be good for informing your board. So if that's happening, and you're doing that, say, every second meeting, and then you're tipping in prep for your annual meeting and your budget meeting and your various other pieces, you've now got a board calendar for the year. And you've got the basis to have half or 2/3 of your meeting on forward-facing. And the second thing that needs to happen in your board meeting is this. Who is the customer of the board report? There's a clue in what we call it. The board. Who writes it? Not the board. What happens normally? Chief executive writes a report, that's fantastic. In lieu of any information, they write what they think is appropriate. That's actually fair enough. But it's on the customer of the report, the recipient, the board, to say, and the recommendation that I put with boards when I'm working with them is once a year, sit down and man up, have a conversation about what goes into the report. If it's not satisfying your needs, say so in the board meeting and work with the chief executive and say, we want it formatted in this way, we want this type of content. So if you've got 4 strategic priorities, have 6 sections. Your dashboard and forward-facing stuff, 1 section for each of your priorities, and then a section at the end where you give the chief executive the opportunity to signal anything else. And you work your way through that. If your board is absolutely serious about being a value-creating engine, then it could go a long way worse than reading and taking on board what Socrates had to say a few years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much. We're going to have the opportunity to have questions and panel conversation after dessert, aren't we, Lloyd? So why don't I sit down and I'll when I get up again, we'll have that up there so you can get my contact details, but I'll just leave that up there for you. Enjoy your dessert, and the panel will be up here soon. Thank you.